All right, so we're looking at chapter 6 here, cognitive behavioral therapy. So cognitive behavioral therapy, a little bit of a different technique here compared to behavior therapy. Behavior therapy was a little bit more, talking about working with our clients' behaviors. Well, cognitive behavioral therapy is a little bit more focused on our thoughts and our emotions and how those do still affect our behaviors, and how all of those things are sort of linked together. So cognitive behavioral therapy focuses on people's thoughts, emotions, and behaviors and how they affect one another. So what we're looking for here in ways that we can use this information to help our clients, this is going to be focusing on understanding our clients' like thinking patterns and understanding about the connection between how our behaviors can improve our thoughts, which can improve our feelings, which can improve our behaviors, which can improve our thoughts, right? We're kind of back to the whole feedback loop situation here. But we love feedback loops. We can use feedback loops to affect very, very positive change in ourselves, but also in our clients. And so we are looking at specific interventions to look at how to improve things like our personality, right? And so in order to understand that, we kind of need to have a pretty good understanding of what we mean when we say personality. Now, normally I would do this really fun thing in class where we would actually gauge our personality. We'd take a little personality test. There's a lot of different types of personality tests out there, but the one that I kind of prefer, because honestly it's a little shorter, is the Big Five personality test. And this is what's going to be found in your, this is going to be the one that's found in your texts. So firstly, personality, right? So personality, we're going to define that as an individual behaving in specific ways in the various situations of daily life, right? So your personality is how you respond, how you behave to certain like situations, right? So it's not just like, when you describe someone as being like, oh yeah, they've got a really cheery personality, right? Sure, that means that generally they are cheerful in like their response to things. So they are probably a little bit more extroversion. Hold on. Excuse me. Probably a little bit more extroverted and agreeable. Unbelievable. Ugh. Okay. So that's sort of like what you described there versus like somebody that you might know who if you were describing them, you're like, oh, they have a really hard time like trusting in other people, right? That tends to be like a little bit more like, that's going to show like low levels of agreeableness, right? And probably like low levels of conscientiousness as well. They tend to be a little bit, a little bit high levels of conscientiousness. Maybe they tend to be a little bit like more organized and like they're a little bit more focused on like how the process of something is going, but they are not exactly like stoked to just simply like go with the flow. They're going to want to know all the variables and things like that, tend to be a little bit more solitary, a little more reserved. So this is where when we look at personality, like I said, there's a million different versions of personality out there. There's the big one that everybody is probably the most familiar with, that you've probably heard of, is the Myers-Briggs assessment, which is a very, 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 very long assessment. But Myers-Briggs is a personality test. And sometimes they'll actually give people like Myers-Briggs assessments in like the professional setting. Like people will often sometimes do this in professional settings where they're looking for like to like hire someone. They want to know like, what someone's personality is like, depending on like where they're going to hire them or place them inside of a company. And so Myers-Briggs, because of that, and also because of very effective marketing, has sort of been picked up as sort of the go-to style of personality tests. Because like I said, it kind of worked its way into like the corporate world, and now it's like very solid, and a lot of people put a lot of stock in this. Same thing is true of like the Big Five personality, but it's a little bit different. It's a little bit of a smaller assessment here. And so the Big Five personality test is basically going to break people down into where they fall in these five major categories. And then there's sort of like, high levels in those categories or low levels in those categories. So you're going to be, there's basically 10 things that we're looking at here. So the Big Five is an assessment designed to divide common personalities into 5 very broad dimensions that describe people's tendencies to behave in predictable ways. So when we look at this, right, and we're talking about this, you kind of want to analyze, like, think a little bit about like yourself, but also think about like people that you know. One of the main aspects of personality that we're going to see here is like an openness to experience, right? By the way, you can remember this acronym by remembering OCEAN. OCEAN is the big 5 personalities we're looking at. That's going to be openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. So openness to experience, right? These are people who tend to be very inventive, or people who tend to be very, very curious, right? And if you have low levels of openness, then you tend to be a little bit more cautious and a little bit more consistent, right? It's funny, like I'm definitely like up for inventiveness, and like I like to be as creative as possible, and I tend to be a very curious person. But what's kind of funny is like I am very much like a creature of habit. Like I know that about like my personality. So I tend to be kind of consistent in like certain things that I do. So on like an openness scale, depending on like the people that I'm around or like the type of experience that I'm going, my openness levels are going to kind of fluctuate a little bit. But this is going to reflect a person's high degree of intellectual curiosity and creativity, as well as the preference this person has for novelty and variety, right? So that's going to be your openness. If you're the type of person who loves like novelty, and you love like a lot of variety, well, then you're probably going to have like a high level of openness. So if I've got a client who I know has like, expressed that they really love like novelty and things like that, then chances are I'm going to write some workouts for them, and I'm going to pitch those workouts in a way to like get that client excited, talking about like the novelty of those things, rather than calling something by the name that it is in my textbook or the name that every personal trainer knows it by, if my client has like a goofy nickname for an exercise, I will start using that nickname as well, because it'll be like kind of a funny thing that this client is going to appreciate. They're going to be like, oh, that's funny. Or I'll call it something by like a totally wacky, goofy name, little things like that. Or maybe I'll be like, hey, so here's what we're doing today. I got a super fun workout for you. This is going to be different than anything you've ever tried before. And that's going to get that person really excited, right? When I used to run boot camps, I used to run like I would always do, not always, but like often I would throw in these little themed workouts, right? So like the Hunger Games series was just coming out back in the day. So I did like a Hunger Games themed boot camp, the first Avengers movie was still very, was this new thing at the time. And so like I did like a fun like Avengers themed workout. And so little things like that, which are kind of fun and goofy, right? That might play on someone's openness to experiences. Now, let's say we look at someone's like conscientiousness, right? So conscientious people, these are people who tend to be very organized, people who tend to be very efficient, rather than people who tend to be very easygoing or careless, right? And like I think like this is another one, like, I think we're all gonna have like varying levels here. I can be very conscientious, and like I think I'm very conscientious in the workplace, but I tend to not be very conscientious in like my home life, not quite as often. So this reflects a person's perseverance in the face of challenges. So that is also part of conscientiousness. Like if something gets hard, are you going to keep pursuing it? That's conscientiousness as well. And so like if you've got the grit to keep going, that is very much going to show high levels of conscientiousness. But it's also the ability to complete tasks in a very disciplined, like well organized manner. So if you're going like, I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do that, then I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do that, right? You're kind of checking off the boxes. That's also conscientiousness. This is probably the one guy today, guys, that we're going to spend the most time talking about. Conscientiousness, we have seen like high levels of conscientiousness be directly related to fitness success. we see that high levels of conscientiousness are the clients who tend to succeed the most often. Clients who have low levels of conscientiousness are the ones who need a little bit more coaching. And when you think about like what this is as like an aspect of personality, it becomes pretty clear to understand why, right? These are people who, like I said, they're very organized and they persevere in the face of like challenges. So if you've got a client who is maybe losing weight, and then all of a sudden like it stalls, somebody who has like low levels of conscientiousness, they're going to feel like everything has sort of derailed and they're not making any progress. So that might knock them off the wagon, right? Whereas somebody who has like, high levels of conscientiousness, they're probably going to go, all right, like this didn't work very well this week, but I'm going to trust the process and, look back. And then they like probably are very organized. So chances are they can look back on the last week of training and be like, oh, that's right. It was a really stressful week at work, and I overate a little bit. They can look back and like find those things. Again, I know I've been talking about this consistently. We have said this every day in this class so far in a row. But self-monitoring, food journals, workout journals, apps, things like that, are really effective ways to increase conscientiousness, right? I like to think of conscientiousness also as like awareness. But that doesn't work for the acronym. Then it would be OAN. But ocean. Conscientiousness is very much like, how aware are you of everything that's like going on, so I'll give you here's a weird example of like how I tend to be pretty conscientious sometimes. I tend to really put a lot of stock in awareness. So I recently was talking to Mo. He and I are both like, we kind of nerd out on interesting like research that's going on in the world of exercise. And like, I really like to be kind of experimental with my own like fitness journey sometimes. And I like to try like new things. So again, a little bit of like openness there, right? But I also really like to make sure that if I'm going to try new things and I want to see success on something, I want to make sure that like it's because, I was doing it properly. So like, for instance, last year I went on keto for a couple months because like everybody had been talking about the keto diet for so long. And I was like, fine, like I will do the freaking keto diet. And then like a little while before that, I had tried CrossFit, which by the way is super, super fun. I had a really good time at CrossFit actually. Because I had basically been talking trash about CrossFit for years because, we work in corrective exercise. And so like, I was like, CrossFit's made me a lot of money. Like I'm a big fan that exists because people get hurt and then they come see me. Talking trash. And one of my clients was like, isn't that a little unfair of you to like talk trash if you're not going to try it? What's up, Andres? Question?
Yeah, I did CrossFit as well.
Yeah.
And I did it for like about a month.
Yeah.
It was really intense.
It can be very intense. Yeah, absolutely. See, I actually really enjoy it. I think that it was a really good time, but at the same time, I am a fitness professional, right? Like I'm an expert on how to keep myself safe. And so this is a true story about my CrossFit experience, by the way. And I did keep my membership and I did keep going after this, but literally, the first night I went, I watched someone completely rupture their hamstring. I'm sorry, rupture their calf, right? Rupture their calf.
How they do that?
What's that?
How did they do that?
So the place I went to, they were, I didn't know how CrossFit works, and so I showed up early enough because I knew, like, gym membership, right? I knew I was gonna sign all the paperwork and waivers and all this and that. And so I show up, and I showed up like way early. Those waivers, it was a very fast process. So I was like, all right, well, I'm about to do this workout at 6:00, so I got 10 minutes. So I went through and did like a, full body stretch and stuff. And I was like, whatever, I'll do some stretches before, obviously they're going to lead us through some stretches and get us warmed up. And then like, the teacher, the way CrossFit kind of works is they're like, all right, everybody gather over here. So, and they bring you over to the whiteboard and they're like, so here's your warm up. You're going to go through this. And then, we're going to let everybody group up and then we're going to start the workout, which will be this tonight. And I'm looking at this whiteboard and the warm up was like this wasn't like you had to run out to the parking lot, run through the parking lot, down the street to this one fire hydrant, and then like back. And it was a 400-meter distance. And then you had to do like 25 push-ups or something, and something. But I was like, is that a 400-meter? And it was labeled like sprint. I was like, is that a 400-meter sprint for the warm-up? Like, first off, 400 meters is widely regarded as one of the hardest events in athletics. And also, like, you don't sprint to warm up. So I was like, that's pretty wild. But at the same time, like, I'm a runner. So I was like, this is great. Like, and I'm stoked to be able to do this. And so I'm doing it. And sure enough, this one guy, there's kind of a competitive nature in the air. I mean, I'm sure you experienced this, Andres, when you were there. These places tend to be a little competitive. You're putting your score up on the whiteboard or whatever. And so this guy's like doing a good job keeping up with me. And I was like, man, this guy's crushing it, And he's outdoing me in some of the push-up stuff, like in some of the upper body stuff. This guy's like faster than I am, and I'm catching him on the runs. And so we're kind of like pinging back and forth, competing a little bit. And it comes down to like I think the last 2 rounds, and I was like, all right, well, I'm gonna go all out here. And so I sprinted pretty hard in this last little bit, and this guy's like coming up, and sure enough, like right as we get back to the parking lot, this guy just he's near me, and I just see him disappear from behind, and I was like, what happened? And like he just like tumbles on the parking lot on the pavement, and sure enough, like he just tore his Achilles tendon, ruptured his calf.
Wow.
And I'm like, that's why you don't warm up doing sprints. Like, that seems like the only thing that could have happened. I kind of kept my mouth shut, and the guy was all right, but definitely gonna take 6 weeks off from getting to work out at all. And so that was a quick lesson for me. That was literally the first time I ever went to CrossFit. It's funny, I was tempted to cancel my membership right then and there, but I was like, whatever, I want to do this. And so I would show up about 20 minutes before class started, literally every time. And I would go through like a full body mobility and stretch routine, because I was definitely not going to let that kind of thing happen to me. And so I did that to keep myself safe. And I had a great time. I had a really fun time doing that CrossFit. I did it for, I think I did it for 12 weeks, and I was very consistent about it. Whenever I do these things like this, I always give it like at least 2 to 3 months, and I'm always crazy consistent about it because I want the results to be very consistent. And so I was like, I'm going to go, and I bought an unlimited membership, and I went 4 days per week, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and I would do sort of my own thing on Wednesdays. And I had a blast. I thought it was really, 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 really fun. That's my honest review, is that it is really, really fun. However, if I didn't know what I was doing, I definitely, and maybe it was the coaches leaving me alone because I knew how to do a lot of the exercises, but I definitely didn't feel like it was a super safe environment. Because I was definitely like, these are some pretty technical lifts, and we're doing it in a group setting. There's no way this one coach can watch every single person in this room effectively. So I did feel like that was pretty dangerous, but not for somebody like me. So if you're like advanced and you feel like you can keep yourself safe, it is objectively intense, but that doesn't mean that it's dangerous. You know what I mean? That's like my very, 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 very honest review. I did the same thing with like hot yoga. I committed crazy intense to hot yoga for 8 weeks, a little over a year ago, where I went for 60 days uninterrupted, including Thanksgiving Day. That I will say is not very healthy, but that was also a really good time. So I like novelty. This is a part of my personality that I really enjoy. I'm willing to sort of sacrifice, certain things in my life like a normal routine, because I really like the idea of doing these kind of fun, novel, like little experiments, right? And that's kind of an example of what we're seeing there, right? This openness to experiences. But I also like track these things really intensely. I keep track of like when I'm going, because if something goes wrong while I'm doing this, I want to know why, right? Like if I do get hurt, I want to know like what caused it. And that's where like this conscientiousness kind of comes in. Now, that being said, conscientious people also tend to be pretty organized, which I definitely struggle with. I'm definitely not the most organized person, you know? There are times where, so I remember this one time my ex, something, she had dropped something, or maybe I had dropped something, and that thing had gotten kicked under the bed. And like, I just knew, I remember that. And literally like a month later, she was like, have you seen this? I'm like, oh yeah. And I went over and like reached under the bed and grabbed it. And she was like, if you knew it was there, why'd you leave it under the bed? And I was like, because I knew it was there. It's a very unconscientious thing to do. It's a very messy, disorganized thing. So there's definitely, again, like aspects to this, right? These are the aspects of your personality. And having awareness of this is helpful because you can use that information to become more aware and therefore have a better chance of making like changes in your life if you're unhappy, which is what we want to encourage in our clients, right? Now, there's also extroversion. Extroversion is people who tend to be very outgoing, people who tend to be very energetic, rather than people who tend to be very solitary or very reserved. Sorry, Dalen, you'll appreciate this. My friend, I gotta put my phone on silent. I thought it was a student, and it is just a buddy of mine, texting me about GameStop going crazy again. Friggin' GME is blowing up again. So extroversion, people who tend to be very outgoing, people who tend to be very energetic, rather than people who tend to be a little more solitary, a little more reserved. You know, I think this is what you're going to see a lot around like Sochi. We tend to be a pretty large group of extroverted people in general. I mean, obviously, that's not always the case, but this is going to reflect a person who exhibits high energy, positive emotions, and assertiveness. So assertiveness, remember, not just like, it's not you being aggressive, it's assertive. It means that you are standing up for yourself, you know, as well as a sociability and a tendency to seek the stimulation in the company of others. So extroversion, if you recognize that in your client, is another thing that you can use as like a really effective tool to affect positive change. If you've got a client who's very extroverted, encouraging them to participate in group exercise could be really, could be a really effective tool, right? Like getting them to have like a gym partner is really, really helpful. You know, I had a client who was, really struggling with just like finding motivation. She would always show up for our training sessions, but I was like, did you do your homework? She was like, no. I was like, did you do your homework? She was like, no. And I was like, ugh. I was like, you got to do your homework or I am going to put you with another trainer. And so eventually, like, what was interesting is she ended up bringing in one of her employees, like a person who was just like under her at this company. And I did a training session with her and built them a workout that they could both do together as their homework. So I would do, I didn't train the other friend like regularly. I did just like a single 1 or 2 sessions with her. But then like, this other woman that I was training on the regular, she had her workouts that she would do with me. And then she had like sort of a hybrid workout that she would do with her friend. And it was great. All of a sudden she started doing it regularly because like her friend, who didn't have like the one-on-one training that, that she had access to, was super stoked because like, she was having like a gym partner that was like, and she was getting advanced workouts that were like really pushing her. And so she would constantly like, reach out to my client, be like, hey, we going to the gym today? And she'd be like, oh yes, like, and it was great. Like, that was a great way, to take advantage of an extroversive personality. Now, the exact opposite could be true as well. You could have a client who tends to be a little more introversive. And if that's the case, you're going to spend more time, like, maybe you actually need to make sure that you are working out in a very private area of the gym, a low traffic area. I'm not saying you have to be like super private or anything, but like, this is the type of client who might actually be really stoked. A thing that a lot of gyms are doing nowadays is they have like the trainer designated, the trainer only designated areas. They might be stoked about something like that. That could be a huge selling point for a client like that. So somebody who tends to be a little more solitary, tends to be a little more reserved, that's something to look for. Now we've also got agreeableness. Agreeableness, these are people who tend to be very friendly, tend to be very compassionate, versus people who tend to be very analytical or detached, right? So agreeableness reflects a person's tendency to be very compassionate and very cooperative, rather than very suspicious and antagonistic towards others. It's funny, like, I think that I'm pretty agreeable when it comes to like other people, but at the same time, I am very, like, I can be very analytical or very detached sometimes. I like, so if someone was like speaking to me, like, I definitely try to be as agreeable as possible. I like to consider my actions before I do them, like, I like to consider the effect that my actions are going to have on the world. Hopefully that, I'm trying to put something better out there than I'm taking away. But at the same time, I definitely am aware of how, just part of our personality as people in general is that we tend to identify more with our in group than we do with our out group. So, I will sometimes be a little analytical or not about super analytical or pessimistic or anything, but I will be very detached towards others. Which a friend of mine pointed out one time. He was like, sometimes you get a little like dark when you're talking about a lot of people you don't care about. And I'm like, do I? And he's like, oh yeah. He's like, it gets a little intense sometimes. Because what I'll say oftentimes, if somebody's doing something, is I'm like, it's like, I care about this person. I'm nothing that person. I don't dislike them, but I have no reason to like them either, right? Like, I don't have like a personal connection to them. And so like, I'm all in over here, and I just don't care. That's what happens, a lot of times. Like, imagine, playing a pickup game, right? If you got like a stranger who's at your pickup game and that person starts trash talking, right? Like, when your friends trash talk you, it's fun. When a stranger does it, you're like, we're not close. Like, we don't have a connection here, right? So again, like, I think that I tend to be more of an agreeable person, but there's definitely aspects of my personality that can be very detached sometimes. So that is a level of agreeableness. If you're working with a client who tends to be sort of suspicious or antagonistic towards others, again, this is a situation where like a group exercise setting may not necessarily be perfect. And you may put a lot more effort towards building like a relationship with this person, right? If your client has like low levels of agreeableness, this sometimes can be like a challenge, and you'll recognize it. You'll recognize it when like the person, like, they'll sign up for a gym membership, but then like they show like a pretty clear disconnect between like being stoked or being motivated by you. Like, if you're putting a lot of energy into like motivating them and getting them excited, and they're just like, it's just washing right off, that sometimes can be like a challenge that you have to overcome. One of the best ways that I've found to do it is finding a way to get them to start talking. And asking open-ended questions. So questions that they cannot, because they are ninjas. Low agreeable level people are ninjas about answering questions as shortly as possible, yes or no. So you have to be, I have found that what works really well is asking questions that are very open-ended, that don't have the ability to be answered like yes or no. And it will be a little uncomfortable at first, because like, you can tell this person is like not that stoked to be like open and talking about this kind of stuff. But then eventually, like, you're going to find like a specific nugget of information. You're like, I got it, right? You're going to find that part of their personality that sort of adheres you to this person, right? Like, gets the two of you to start agreeing. Versus like the people who tend to be like agreeable. These are like the Labrador people, you know, like, here's a good example. Oh my God. I've never said this before, and this is the best analogy. Here's agreeable people versus disagreeable people. Agreeable people are like dogs, and disagreeable people are like cats. Dogs are great. I love dogs. They love human beings by default. Every dog I've ever met is just their default personality is trusting and friendly. Whereas cats, you gotta earn it, which is actually why I like cats more. I actually like the fact that, you know, you got to kind of earn it a little bit. And the cat's like, all right, like, I don't like you by default. I chose to like you, which I think is better. And that's the thing about disagreeable people. You will actually find that sometimes they're the strongest, most loyal clients you can get, actually. And lastly, we've got neuroticism, which is our fifth aspect here of personality. These are people who tend to be very sensitive, or people who tend to be very nervous, rather than people who tend to be very confident or very secure. So this is the tendency for a person to experience unpleasant emotions such as anger, anxiety, or depression, or feeling very vulnerable, versus people who tend to be a little bit more secure in themselves, or secure and confident around others. So if your client shows like a high level of neuroticism, which, by the way, this is one that we run into a lot, they are going to have very low confidence and low efficacy when it comes to exercise. So remember, efficacy, self-efficacy, right, is your belief in your ability to succeed, your belief that you can accomplish a task. Clients who have like high levels of neuroticism oftentimes have a very low belief that they are going to be successful. They're like, I want to lose weight and I signed up for this, but like I've tried a million times and this is probably just another thing on the list that's not going to work. And it's like, ouch, you know, like that's such a brutal outlook sometimes. And so, you know, this is where we are trying to, you know, lower this neuroticism. We're trying to help our client feel a little bit more confident, a little bit more secure. You guys might remember from the weight loss mod, because I know the two of you were in that. You guys might remember when we talked about like self-efficacy, one of the things that you need to do is build your client upwards when you're modifying exercises. So like if you've got a client, my favorite example is push-ups. If you got a client who's doing push-ups, start on the knees and then say, now, if that's not challenging enough, you can take it up to your toes. That's building upwards rather than, you know, bringing your client. If your client is very neurotic and you have them try to do push-ups and they fail, and it's like, oh, you can make it easier by putting it down on your knees. That's negative, right? That makes them feel like they failed, right? So we want to make sure that we help our clients like feel more confident and secure. We want to try to raise, or I guess lower the levels of neuroticism there. So like I said, all of these are aspects of personality. I think I tell you, get familiar with them. This is my favorite part of this whole lesson, because I think like being aware of these different types of personalities make it easier for you to like communicate with another person more effectively, right? Now, like I said, the big one when it comes to the big five personalities is conscientiousness, right? So conscientiousness, a lot of studies have shown that conscientiousness can actually be a direct predictor of like a person's weight status. And we're looking at weight here in particular, not like health, but like we know that clients who have like low levels of conscientiousness, individuals who lack conscientiousness, tend to struggle with their weight a little bit more commonly. They tend to have like a higher BMI. And so when that happens, we see like that happen with a client, right? What that's sort of indicating to us is like, you know, they are unaware of the things that are resulting in weight gain in their life. They're unaware of them, right? They're just living with low levels of like awareness in like their lifestyle, right? And this is, like I said, like I have this sometimes. I mean, look at like, you know, that TED talk that I showed you, Inside the Mind of the Master Procrastinator, right? I love that freaking TED talk because it speaks to me. There's definitely times where I will put stuff off and it feels like time travel. You know, it's like, oh, that's coming up in 6 months. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, that's coming up tomorrow. How did 6 months pass? You know, like that's sort of what it feels like. It's like when you take a nap in the middle of the day and you wake up and you're like, huh? It's like traveling through time. Like all of a sudden you're just in the future. It's like you didn't mean to take a nap, right? Did you guys ever do that when you were a kid? Did you ever lay down for a second and then wake up like hours later? Oh, I used to do that all the time.
3 hours, 4 hours sometimes.
What's that?
I used to take a nap for 3 or 4 hours sometimes.
Yeah, right. It's crazy, and you're just like, huh, right?
I can't even do that anymore.
Oh yeah, I hear you. Yeah, and I actively try not to. Man, at one time when I was a kid, my parents were watching a movie, and I only fell asleep for like a little while because I woke up and they were still in the middle of that movie, and I remember thinking in my brain, I was like, oh, it's the next day. Because I never take naps as a kid. I was not like a napper at this age of my life. And then it became like a super napper later. But like, I like never took naps. So my brain was like, well, we would have not been asleep if it wasn't us going to bed. So, and I remember being like, why are my parents watching this movie again? And why are they watching it before I have to go to school? What a bunch of weirdos. And then I just like go about my day and I like went and took a shower and I like got my clothes on and I like left for the bus. And my parents watched this whole thing happen. And they were like, they just watched me leave and get ready for school at like 4 p.m.
That is hilarious.
Bunch of weirdos. I mean, I'm a weirdo, but still. So yeah, that shows a severe lack of awareness, right? That's conscientiousness, right? So clients with low conscientiousness may often, on our part, guys, really require a lot more closer monitoring on behalf of like the coach, right? So we are going to spend a little bit more time, helping our clients develop awareness and encouraging them to self-monitor and self-plan as much as possible. If you got a client with low levels of conscientiousness, one of the best things I can tell you to give them tips, encourage them to make a freaking shopping list. Do not wing it when you go to the grocery store. That's a big part of it actually, because low levels of conscientiousness, like you start grabbing one thing and then you grab another thing and then all of a sudden you're unaware. This is how it feels. There's another sort of a weird analogy, but this is what it feels like to go to Costco sometimes. You're like, everything is so cheap. And then you get to the checkout line and you're like, $300. What happened? It's built to help you with low levels of conscientiousness. So that is sort of what we're looking at here. Now, there is the Big 5 personality test. And I'm going to send this out to you guys so you guys can have it just to take it for yourself. It's kind of a fun thing that you can just sort of test yourself on. This is in your reading as well. If you go to chapter 6, which is not opening. There we go. Come on, computer. This thing's starting to get full with all these freaking videos that I'm making. So there is actually a little assessment here based on the information above. Like, do you see yourself on a scale of 1 to 7, where you agree strongly with a 1, or you strongly disagree with a 1, or you strongly agree with a 7? And these first two questions are related to your openness. The second two questions are related to your conscientiousness. So it's going to be like 10 questions here. And you are going to basically answer them as truthfully as possible and score yourself. So do you see yourself as extroverted, socially dominant, and full of enthusiasm? For me, I would say I'm somewhere between like a 5 and a 6 on this. Socially dominant, not so much. I tend to, like in a large group of people, I tend to actually get a little quiet, which is, I know, very shocking to the people who have, heard me lecture. But like generally I tend to be a little bit less on that one, but I see myself as somewhat like extroverted. So I'd put that on like a 5 and between like a 5 and a 6. Do you see yourself as not shy or reserved? Yeah, I mean, for the most part, I don't think I'm that shy. So again, I'd probably put like a 5 or a 6 there. Not overly critical or argumentative. I don't know. I like to argue. I think it's kind of fun sometimes. And so like, I would say, I'd put myself as like a 3 or a 4 on that one. But do I see myself as like sympathetic and warm? Yeah, I try to be as sympathetic as possible. So I'd probably put a 6 on that personally. Am I open to new experiences? Totally. Strongly agree. Yeah, love doing new weird stuff. Unconventional and creative, probably just a 6 on that one. Well organized, careful, and responsible, probably like a 3 or a 4. Dependable and self-disciplined though, probably like a 4 or 5, maybe a 6. So probably just a 5. Emotionally unstable. I don't know. I think that I've got a pretty good stability on my emotions. So I'd probably put that as a 2 or maybe even a 1. Am I easily upset when I'm behind the wheel of a car? I'm going to put that as a 7. But in general, I'd say probably around like a 3 or a 4. So, what we would do is we'd kind of total those all up and see, if you receive like a high score on 1 to 2, you tend to be a little more extroverted, a little more agreeable, open, conscientious, or neurotic, right? So take this test. Give yourself a little personality test. It's kind of fun. And you can maybe like learn a little bit about like the things that will help you in your life, So any questions on that, you two? Questions, comments, concerns?
No, sir.
Hmm.
I've heard of it before, the Myers-Briggs.
This one?
Yeah, I've heard of that
Yeah.
a while back.
There's a lot of them out there. I will say this: the one thing about personality tests, this is me being like a cynic, but like as much as I think that the personality test can be accurate, but there is a small part of me that wishes people would not learn their own personalities.
Right.
Because then they end up doing that thing where they're like, oh yeah, excuse my behavior, I'm this type of person. And then it's like, well, that's just you using a personality test as like an excuse to be like kind of an a-hole.
Yeah,
Right?
those people don't know what they're talking about.
I dislike that so much sometimes. Or like when somebody's like, I'm an Aries, I have this thing, and they allow, and it's like their way of excusing like their bad behavior. I'm like, no, that is not how this works. You have to take responsibility. Imagine getting pulled over by the cops and being like, sorry, I'm a Libra. What are you gonna do? Don't give me a ticket.
No, those guys are complete assholes, for real.
What's that?
Those guys are complete assholes.
Yeah. So there is a small part of me that wishes that people weren't allowed to learn their own personality tests. But at the same time, I'm always talking about why it's so important to be conscientious. So you can see the bind that I'm in. All right. So using cognitive behavioral therapy, using CBT on personality. What's great about all this, again, it can help us, it can help our clients, and it can help us help our clients think, feel, and behave. And it can help us understand like which interventions are going to be most effective with our client. Remember, interventions are these little, these tools, like what tools we are going to use to help, right? So the Big 5 personality test is helpful because it can allow you to figure out, like, get inside your client's brain and be like, so the food journaling did not work for you because you have never done journaling before. Like you've never been like a very conscientious. We got to find a way to make this easier for you. So like I said, individuals with low conscientiousness often will need a little bit closer monitoring. They're going to need a little bit more hands-on assistance and a little bit more planning. So actually, the version that I actually made a version of this, I made a little worksheet that I will attach in today's email. You can totally just read the chapter and just take it and write it down on scratch paper. But I did make a little worksheet here. This is normally where I would do this in class, which is so fun. But where the heck is it? Where did I put that stupid thing? I wouldn't have put it in here. That'd be a weird place for it because that's not where it belongs. I don't remember where I put this damn thing. Anyway, this is the worksheet. I'm gonna have to look through my email because I definitely have it in there, but it'll have like the key to understand them. And then there is a little spider chart on here. You don't have to do the spider chart, but I think the spider chart is super, super fun. Basically, you total up your scores and then you put a little dot wherever you scored it. So there's, 1 to 7, and you put a little dot on it, and then it makes this little blob, and it will show you like where you land. It's like a stat sheet for all my D&D nerds out there. So that is what we're looking at in terms of personality. Now, what are some of the techniques that we can use Now that we understand a little bit about what cognitive behavioral therapy is, understanding thoughts, right? And we understand a little bit about like what personality is, how can we use this? How can we use this to help our clients, right? So goal setting is always effective, planning, decisional counseling, helping your client understand like, let's talk about like weighing the options here. What are our pros? What are our cons? Visualization, which we'll talk more about tomorrow. Problem solving, which is my favorite. Stress management, and there's lots of other techniques as well. But one of the things that you can do is you can help your clients create healthy obsessions. Now, a lot of times we hear the word obsession, it tends to be like kind of negative. It's like, oh, why are you so obsessed with me? It tends to be like a stalker situation. But no, obsessions can be very, very good things, right? Like if you have an obsession with being a productive person, that's a healthy thing, right? If you have an obsession with your own happiness, this is a very healthy thing, right? So it's a constant. What an obsession is a constant preoccupation with planning and execution of target behaviors in order to reach like health goals, right? So this involves like daydreaming, thinking about like maybe what you're going to look like in 6 months or how you're going to perform, planning, being like, all right, when I get home, I'm going to do this, this, and this. Routines that are regularly a part of your life, all these things that help you maintain target behaviors. And target behaviors are going to be, things that lead to a healthy lifestyle, healthy diet, healthy thinking, and healthy, activity. So we really like these ideas of like healthy obsessions, right? Like I told you guys, I'm like obsessed with raising my credit score right now. And I'm obsessed with like saving and learning about investing. It has been this really fun thing, this fun journey that I've been on over the last like couple months. We're only in March. I've only been doing this for about 3 months now, but I'm totally into it. No sweat. This is definitely, these are, when we're looking at like healthy obsessions, these are things that enhance your life rather than like unhealthy obsessions where maybe you're constantly thinking about, stuff that is like, obviously like the classic example of like an unhealthy obsession would be like alcohol, right? Or drugs. But like even just like constantly thinking about like what others think about you, that can be like an unhealthy obsession. Constantly thinking about like the negative aspects of things. Like if you have an obsession where you are preoccupied thinking about some of your maybe fitness or nutrition failures, that's not what we want to dwell on. We want to dwell on our successes, right? So healthy obsessions are definitely things. So one of the things that we can use to create healthy obsessions, right? Again, kind of coming back to this concept of like self-monitoring. So self-monitoring, which we just talk about so often because it's just been proven to be so freaking effective, is going to be a systematic observation of target behaviors and the recording of those target behaviors. So workout logs, food journals, using an app to catch yourself, right? All of those things are examples of self-monitoring. And self-monitoring is going to improve your performance. And it's not only going to improve your performance because you're going to be aware of things, it's also going to improve your performance because you're going to be more committed to those things, Like, true story, I just got a notification just a little bit ago on my little calendar here. It said like, hey, your new credit score is ready to be seen, because I have 2 things that are both checking them simultaneously. And so I get updates on that pretty much every 2 weeks. That's kind of freaking cool, So that is, that's an example of like self-monitoring. Like I'm stoked to be able to check that and sort of see how it's improved over time. And that's what's also really fun. This app that I use sort of shows you like a bar chart or a line graph rather that shows you improvements. So self-monitoring, right? It can improve your performance. It helps and foster like a stronger commitment. This is why there are so many like apps out there that are like daily meditation apps, or, like Duolingo. I don't know if anybody's ever tried that. It's an app for learning new languages. That friggin' thing will send you 1,000 texts a day saying like, hey, you haven't done your language thing today, which is great because like if you are committed, you're going to go through it, So that's where we create these like healthy obsessions. And this is where self-monitoring has been shown to be effective. Now, there's no perfect version of self-monitoring. Like I said, like food journals work really well, workout journals work really well, or at least they generally do. But maybe that's not perfect for your client. Maybe your client is just like not into like writing, or they always leave their journal laying around. So instead, maybe they're a little bit more app-based, right? Or maybe they're just going to check a website regularly. Everybody's got their own versions of self-monitoring out there, but all of them have been shown to be very effective. So there doesn't need to be specifically like one version of this. So I'm going to show you guys a quick little video here by Nassim that's going to talk about this self-monitoring and sort of how to coach your clients towards doing it. Nope. This one.
As a fitness or wellness professional, it should be the goal to help the client to get to a point where they can sustain long-term behavior change. One of the key components in making this happen is the development of self-monitoring by the client. Self-monitoring is the systematic observation and recording of target behaviors. Self-monitoring provides feedback for the client while also teaching them the awareness they need in order to maintain the healthy behavior changes they have made. There are many techniques that can be utilized for self-monitoring. For example, phone and tablet apps are a quick and easily accessible way for clients to begin self-monitoring. This may be as simple as tracking nutrition and exercise in the notes section of a phone to utilizing a robust activity and nutrition tracking app. Another simple, effective, and popular self-monitoring technique is journaling. This practice puts the client's thoughts and actions right in front of them to see at any time. Journaling should be coached to be free-flowing and without pause, resembling a stream of consciousness writing. In the case of improving fitness or losing weight, journaling around actions related to these goals should be encouraged. Additionally, the client should journal about their experiences, thoughts, and feelings as they journey toward their success. The type of self-monitoring mechanisms implemented should be up to the client and coincide with their own comfort level. The important part of this process will be the consistency with which the client carries out the practice.
It's actually not quite the video I thought it was. All right, but the next one's a big one. So, all right, so this is where journaling, again, comes in very, very handy, right? So keeping regular notes on like thoughts or feelings. When we're talking about cognitive behavioral therapy, we're very much talking about our thoughts, our emotions, and things like that. So journaling has been, huge for that. It's been shown to decrease depression. It's actually been shown to decrease even physical pain, which is very fascinating. But like, there's benefits to journaling about like how you are feeling each day. If you've ever heard of like gratitude journals and things like that, those are really effective. One of my favorite methods for journaling that I adhere to a lot is the idea of what's called a bullet journal. Because again, like I said, I tend to be kind of analytical sometimes. I definitely really like bullet journals, and bullet journals are basically where you create like a bullet point, and then like that is often just like a task. But these have actually become, this is such a modular system that can be modified in so many different ways. The internet has sort of taken this and expanded it in really, really, really interesting ways. So you can see like, this is somebody who's pretty creative, right? They're like talking about like what books they're trying to like read through. And then they talk about like, are they rating it? And so it's like the book down here, they're going to rate it on like a scale of 1 to 5, whether or not they really liked it. It's kind of a fun one, right? But generally one of the biggest things you'll see, that's a habit tracker. It's not what I'm looking for. Where's the like bullet journal mood? So you'll see people who are like actually, are they like anxious or annoyed or frustrated, right? Energetic, calm, sad, depressed, and they're gonna like, track however like they feel about these things, right? So that's kind of a fascinating one. Like, and bullet journals are cool. I think that they are a really unique method that lets you sort of track these things. I don't do a ton of this. Bullet journaling for me doesn't really exist in the form of like an actual journal. Instead, I tend to keep all of like my tasks and things like that. You can see like on like a little whiteboard. And so like I have like little check boxes that I'm trying to like fill out, and I have like monthly, weekly, and like yearly goals, and then I have like a daily task list that I update every morning. It's like the first thing I do when I sit down at my desk. And so like after I go work out, I come up, make myself some breakfast. I drink a protein shake and I make a bowl of cereal and a coffee, and I come up here, fill out that journal. I say journal, but it's an example of journaling, and then start the morning class. And that's literally sort of like what my daily routine looks like. So again, this has been shown to decrease depression, decrease pain, improve your mood. Again, like I don't tend to be the most anxious person in the world, but I super get anxious when I get behind on like my tasks. So that kind of thing keeps me super on point, which is helpful. Good for my brain. Maybe that works for me. Your version might be totally different, so everybody's going to have like a different version of this. Helping your clients determine like what version of it works best for them is going to be really big. This is why, again, encourage your clients to use like workout journals, encourage them to use food journals if they need to. All of that's really important. So next technique that is also really effective at helping, affect positive changes, not only in like our personality, but also like in our lifestyles, is problem solving. This is probably one of my favorite things to talk about in general. And so problem solving is a method for overcoming negative behaviors and or the thoughts and feelings associated with those behaviors, right? So a problem is just this dilemma that doesn't have a quick, immediate solution, right? So when I say like something's a problem, I mean, obviously like, if your dishwasher is full, that's not really a problem, right? Because the immediate solution to that end. We have a solution for it instantly. So when I say problem, it's something that doesn't really have an immediate solution. We're not 100% sure what steps we need to take. And so there's going to be sort of a 5-step problem solving method that you can kind of go for. And this works, by the way, guys, for literally everything in your life, right? Problem solving can, provide it can provide solutions to the problems that your clients are coming to you with. And this process works so well in pretty much everything. So I will say this is a 5-step version. I actually kind of prefer like a 3-step version. This is just a little bit more detailed, which obviously we can't complain about having more detail. But you probably heard me talk about problem solving before in 3 steps, but 5-step version of this, right? The first step 1 is you're going to, you want to have general orientation. You want to set the problem. You want to first recognize that the problem exists and recognize that it can also be solved. This is why, if you've ever seen like an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, this is why the very first thing that they have to do every single time is say that they are an alcoholic. They have to like accept that as like a black and white fact. Recognizing that your problem exists, right? The first step to like any version of like solving any problem or recovery or whatever is recognizing that a problem exists. So helping your client understands like, look, this is something that's like holding you back in your life, right? That's a version of like setting the problem. And a lot of times, one of the reasons we haven't really like moved forward, if we are like unhappy with something, like if something is like making us unhappy in our life, admitting to ourselves that like we may just objectively be bad at something is also part of like setting that problem, if you are unhappy with how much money you're making, if you're unhappy with like emotionally how you might fly off the handle at certain people or certain times, if you're unhappy with your weight or your health or whatever, the first thing you need to recognize is that like, your life is designed to give you those results. Your life is designed to make you unhealthy. Your life is designed to, only make you a certain amount of money. Your life is designed in all these ways. So if you're unhappy with that, then that's a problem. And we need to like recognize that that problem exists. Like me, I totally wish that I made more money, absolutely. I think it would be great. And so like, I need to recognize that like, I haven't taken the actions necessary to make more money. Like I'm very comfortable with my job. I like what I do. So emotionally, like I'm drawn to teaching. Like I enjoy this, right? even if it is on freaking Zoom temporarily. I don't enjoy it as much as I used to. Just being transparent with you guys and honest. But I'm sure you probably feel the same. So we can all be honest here. And so like recognizing that that is like a problem now, if I want to like, still do this thing that makes me happy, which is teaching, while also making more money, I need to change some other aspect of my life, right? Which I've shared with you guys is like investing and like getting into like property management. So that is the problem that I have. The problem that I have is that I'm not doing this in my life currently. Now I need to very clearly define that problem. Now this step is, I think it's one of the most important steps of the whole freaking thing. Step 2, have a very clear and very accurate definition of the problem. So separate any relevant information from any irrelevant information, right? So for instance, let's say I was unhappy. Let's say I'm unhappy with like my salary, right? Let's say that that is like a true sentence. And so then I start complaining that I just don't make enough money. And it's like, well, my boss won't give me a raise, right? If that's accurately the problem, have you had a conversation with your boss about like having this, or did you just expect it to just happen on its own, right? So now like we start to like actually define the problem clearly. Maybe the problem isn't that your boss isn't giving you, maybe the problem is that you haven't had a conversation with your boss about raising your salary, right? Or maybe you're unhappy with what your weight is, right? Like into your problem that you have is like, I'm unhappy with like my weight, right? Well, now it's like, and then you start to say, well, I have a slow metabolism, right? And I was like, okay, well, there's lots of people who have slow metabolisms who have reached like weight loss goals. So the accurate definition of the problem is that we just haven't created like a diet and lifestyle to reflect your metabolism. Right? Like that is clearly defining a problem and separating any of the irrelevant information. Well, I don't have enough time, right? Like that maybe like somebody defines that as their problem. It's like, well, is it that you don't have enough time, or is it that you are spending time on things that you otherwise, things that are more important to you in the short term, right? Kind of going back to that procrastination video we talked about, right? He talks about how like the problem is that like he procrastinates a lot. And then he talks about how like he decided to like zoom in on Google Maps over India and scroll up for an hour just to see what the country was like, which by the way is cool as hell and sounds like something fun. But it sounds like the real problem here is that there are instant gratification activities that are taking priority over the more fulfilling parts of our life, right? So the problem isn't that there was enough time to do something. The problem is that we were prioritizing our time in the wrong way, right? If you have a problem like gaining strength and you say something like, well, I've just always been skinny, right? And I've always had a really hard time gaining muscle, right? The problem, maybe you say like your metabolism is too fast. Maybe the problem isn't that your metabolism is too fast. Maybe the problem is that you aren't consuming enough calories and you aren't training hard enough. And it's like, no, I'm eating as much as I can. I get super full and I can't eat anymore. Okay, great. So now the problem is not that you can't get enough. The problem clearly is that you're not getting enough calories, and you're trying your hardest to get those calories in, to gain weight, to gain muscle. But maybe you're just choosing foods that are not calorically dense enough. This is sort of the opposite problem that we normally have with our clients, where it's like, normally we're like, hey, you need to focus more on like nutrient dense foods. You got to get that energy dense stuff out of there. With someone who's trying to gain weight, maybe they actually need some more energy dense foods, something that has more calories in them. By the way, nuts, super effective tool, by the way, for your hard gainers that are out there. They are packed full of calories. One of my favorites. Now we're starting to very clearly define our problems, right? We're going to separate any irrelevant information, right? Your metabolism is irrelevant because we know that weight gain or weight loss will be the result of creating a deficit or a surplus. And there are ways to do that by just adding more numbers. Adding more numbers to the deficit side by exercising more often, adding more numbers to the deficit side by, well, I guess subtracting more numbers from the deficit side by consuming less calories, right? And then flip those two around for our hard gainers, right? Step 3, we're going to generate alternatives, right? So we're going to list potential solutions before we evaluate them. So this one's kind of fun. When you're problem solving, just throw anything at the wall and see if it sticks. Do not judge your solutions, right? If you're, again, if you're unhappy with how much money you make, like maybe one of your solutions is like, well, all I need to do is win the lottery. That's a bad solution. But like at first, when we're just generating alternatives, like just throw it out there, don't judge, just list as many solutions as you can, because even those crap solutions will actually lead to you creating really good ones later down the road. So just get the ideas flowing when you're sitting there with your client. Be like, all right, we want to like lose weight. We're having trouble getting enough movement in the day. What if we, what if we start going on like an hour-long walk before you go to work in the morning? And your client's like, I'm not getting up that early. Okay, don't judge it. Let's put it on the list, right? And then it's like, all right. And so we put it on the list, and all of a sudden that leads them. It's like, well, an hour-long walk is a good idea. What if I did an hour-long walk, broken up and like little, 20-minute bouts? I do 20 minutes in the morning, which I can definitely, that I can see myself getting up. I do 20 minutes during my lunch break, and then I eat during the remaining 10. And then I do another 20 minutes like before I leave work every day. Boom, there's our 60 minutes, right? And we got there because we thought of a crappy solution first. So just generate as many alternatives as possible, throw everything at the wall, and then we're gonna see what sticks. And that's where step 4 comes in. This is the decision making. Like I said, I tend to kind of blend these two together when I'm doing problem solving, just because don't spend all day with your crappy solutions. That's my advice. Obviously, what's written down is the exact opposite of what I just said. Generate as many alternatives. Don't judge them. I will judge them a little bit. If they're really stupid, don't write them down. I know I'm giving you mixed signals here, but so decision making, try out the best strategy, right? This is where we're going to choose, after we've got our list, we come up with like what the best strategy is, right? And I love doing this with my clients. I love like coming up with like a specific list sitting there like at the desk. This is the really fun stuff of personal training that happens off of the gym floor sometimes, which is weirdly some of the most satisfying stuff you can do. I know we're all in this because we all like working out and stuff. And obviously it's really fun to be on the floor and making people sweat and exercise and do all these really fun physical activities. But honestly, guys, some of this stuff where you're sitting down with a client, you're just writing out like a list of like potential solutions to their problems, and then just circling it. It can be so intellectually stimulating, and your client is like, this is so unique. I've never had a trainer who's like, attacking the fitness and the nutrition and then also like my brain. And it's great. It really is like really, really fun. So choose the best strategy you've got from the options that you laid out. Pick the good ones. And then step 5 is try it. Step 5 is like go out there and get the work done, right? Try out a chosen strategy. This could take place over a day, a week, a year, day, a week, or a month. This is definitely where we're looking at these things. Now, like I said, I generally find I like a 3-step version of this that tends to be a little bit more applicable, where step 1, we recognize and clearly define the problem. Step 2, we solve the problem through like decision making. And step 3 is like, freaking do it, get out there and start working on it. So those are our 5 steps to problem solving. Get familiar with those guys. They're going to come back, consistently. And yeah, any questions on that or comments? Feeling good about the problem solving stuff? Feel like you want to do this now? All right, so let's take a look at stress management here. So another thing, right? Obviously, if we're talking about thoughts and we're talking about feelings and emotions, we have to talk about stress. So stress management is all about like reducing stress, right? So how do you do that? Well, you're going to try to eliminate as many stressors as possible. So stressors are these challenging things that are in our environment, and stress is the negative emotional response to those things, right? So stress is where you are basically responding in an unhealthy way to these stressful things that may be happening in your life, right? So a stressor might be someone's weight status, health status. A stressor might be like things at work, right? And then stress is the negative emotional response that is like associated with that. So one of the biggest things that we're going to see out there, right? We've got major life-changing events and we've got daily hassles. I mean, daily hassles add up, you know. A major life event might be like moving or conflict, death of a loved one, you know. All those things are like huge, and yeah, that's a big amount of stress. But there's also all the daily hassles of just being late, performing poorly, traffic problems, or being criticized by like someone consistently. Maybe you just are forgetful, right? All of those little things lead to like little tiny bits of stress, which add up over time. So one of the ways that we can deal with this, one of the most effective ways, is what we call stress inoculation, right? Which is great because we're talking about like, you know, we're in the world of like vaccines are just a big part of the conversation right now in our world. Well, stress inoculation is building, basically it's like a psychological vaccine, you know, it's building psychological antibodies to stressors, right? So what that can do is simply learning how to like cope with stress more effectively is going to mean that it has less of an impact on you, right? So how do we do this? How do we like inoculate ourselves from stress? Well, we got to let go of the negative attachment to those stressors, right? So part of that is going to start with like educating. So like a lot of times, one of the biggest things that just stresses us out is like a fear of the unknown or like a lack of control, right? I mean, honestly, like, you know, not to be like super controversial and like we should absolutely be wearing masks in public, but you look at like these people who are very argumentative about having to wear a mask, right? Like these people who are like screaming in a grocery store is like, I don't want to wear my mask, right? And they're yelling at other people, right? The reason those people are so stressed out, I mean, obviously those are some of the most stressed freaking people in the world, right? Like at least in that moment where they're screaming at total strangers, right? They're stressed. I'd say that fits our definition, right? A very negative emotional response to this stressor of having to wear like a mask. What they're really stressed out about is very little to do with the freaking mask. That's not what people are stressed out about. What people are stressed out about is like a lack of control. They have like this lack of control in their life, and lack of control just doesn't feel good to any of us, right? Like it's just a very negative thing that we don't like. When you have lack of control, you're upset. It's one of the reasons why like I get upset behind the wheel of a car. Like if I'm on my way somewhere and I feel like I'm starting to slow down because I'm trying to get somewhere quickly and efficiently and I knew how long it was supposed to take. Man, there's nothing worse than when you've got your GPS up and it's like estimated time of arrival, 22 minutes. And then you're driving and then all of a sudden it goes estimated time of arrival, 23 minutes. It's like, you're supposed to go down, not up. Freaks me out. I start losing my mind. So that is a lack of control. You don't have a control in the situation. So you feel this like lack, and so you feel stressed. And so you start to lash out emotionally. So one of the biggest ways that you can inoculate yourself is remove that fear of the unknown, right? Eliminate that fear by educating and be like, look, the reality is like when someone says like, you know, it's only an hour of exercise a day. That's not true. There's, you know, the time you have to get ready. There's the minutes leading up to leaving the house. There's driving there. There's doing it. There's, you know, showering. There's all of the stuff that happens afterwards. This is a pretty big chunk of your day. So, you know, we have to be aware of that. That can actually eliminate stress because it's like an accurate representation of what this activity actually entails. And then it's like, okay, well, now that we know that, hey, this is a much bigger commitment than we wanted to, let's still find a way to fit that in our lifestyle, right? Let's learn, let's educate, let's learn about specifically, you know, what changes we have to make in order to make this fit. Would it fit if we did X, Y, and Z? Yeah, it would. Okay, great. Like that's going to be much less stressful now. We know that we're going to have to deal with this. We know that we're going to have to deal with that, right? We educate, we remove the fear. We've basically shined the light on the monster. Another big helpful phase is making coping self-statements. So one of the other ways you can deal with stress is just saying, I'm awesome. Those are your coping self-statements, right? Learning how to restructure negative thoughts into much more positive, constructive, helpful thoughts is very, very important. So I'm going to show you a video about this in just a second, but good examples of this, right? Good examples of self-statements are, maybe preparing for a stress, be like, all right, here we go. Like little things like that actually reduce your stress. Saying like, all right, I'm about to do this, right? I'm committed to doing this. Like that actually helps. This is why you see it in movies and TV all the time, where that character is like sitting in the car and they're like, here we go. like that's preparing for a stressor, and it can lower your stress because like you are actively like getting ready to confront this thing. Confronting and handling that stressor, like going to meet it rather than avoiding it. How many times have you avoided something in your life because it was scary? And then when you finally did it, you're like, that actually wasn't that bad, right? All that stress for all that time could have been eliminated by just confronting and like getting started. Coping with the feelings at the critical moment. So when that stress really comes to deal, like meeting it rather than like avoiding it. Again, these two are kind of similar, but like coping with those feelings at like the moment where it's sort of like peaking is very important. And then one of the biggest ways is rewarding yourself afterwards in the same way that we reinforce healthy habits, right? We have our habit loop. You have a cue, a routine, and there's a consequence, right? Rewarding yourself for success at the end, like that consequence reinforces your habits, right? Saying like, hey, I did it. I got through this stressful situation. Give yourself a pat on the back and like recognize that. Super, super important, right? This is why you as the coach should constantly be high-fiving your clients, sending them emails saying like, hey, really great job today. You crushed it, right? All of those positive sentences that you're telling your clients, those are really big. So I want to show you a quick video here on the idea of cognitive restructuring. This is the idea of how to take your negative thoughts and restructure them into much more constructive, positive, helpful thoughts. So we're going to watch 2 of these in a row, actually.
Sometimes the hardest thing to work with are negative thoughts that clients have. Negative thoughts are typically immediate and evoke an emotional response. In order to change these negative thoughts, the coach will have to use the technique of cognitive restructuring. Cognitive restructuring is a process by which the client identifies and disputes irrational or unhelpful thoughts. People in general react to a thought or a situation more emotionally than is actually warranted. These extreme thoughts are referred to as automatic problematic thoughts, or APTs. The client can overcome these APTs by using alternative, more supportive thoughts. To do this, have the client write down the negative emotion they are feeling, and then have them work backwards to figure out what the automatic thought most likely is. Then, the client should work to create a more rational and real statement. This helps the client see the difference between the irrational thought and the reality of the situation. Examples of irrational beliefs can include, I never can lose the weight I want to lose. Dieting never works for me. Everyone at the gym is going to know that I can't do this. It is horrible that I've let myself get this out of shape. Coaches and professionals should be on the lookout for schemas. Schemas are pervasive, irrational beliefs that resist change even though they make the client unhappy. There are 8 schemas: ashamed, enmeshed, failure, entitled, impulsive, self-sacrifice, dependent, and perfectionistic. An example of an ashamed schema might be the thought that the client is completely hopeless in trying to do anything right, including exercise.
So here's an example of taking those thoughts and turning them around into something like a little bit more constructive, right? Sorry, trying to kill the intro there.
Oftentimes, people in helping professions will hear their clients make negative statements about themselves and their abilities to make and maintain the healthy lifestyle choices that they need to meet their wellness goals. Constant negative thoughts, or automatic problematic thoughts can be pervasive and destructive to a client's ability to move past setbacks or prevent them from making progress on their goals altogether. Being able to identify these types of thoughts and having strategies for turning them into less negative or even positive thoughts is an important skill when working on challenging goals. You can work with your clients to identify some of those thoughts and help the client determine what might be the best strategy to combat that negativity.
Hey man, great to see you again. How's everything been going?
I've been better.
How's that? I mean, everything okay?
I'm unhappy with the lack of progress I've had. I'm starting to lose motivation and I'm considering giving up.
I mean, as you know, we've been monitoring your weight loss over the past few months, every week. And so far you've been on track with your weight loss up until last week.
I know, but it's last week that I'm concerned about. It was terrible. I should have lost weight. I worked out and I followed the meal plan to the T. I was just really frustrating.
Wow. I see this has gotten to you. I want to emphasize that this happens, okay? It is normal to have a week where you don't lose as much as you have previously, all right? And I'm curious, how do you usually respond to a situation where you feel you've had a setback?
Pretty much like this failure. I get down on myself and I decide that, I'm not successful and I want to quit.
First off, this is not a failure. It might be considered a small setback, but it's definitely not a failure. I'm concerned about how you view this. I want to work with you, help you reframe the situation and what you see as a major setback into, a less negative statement.
Well, what do you mean?
Well, for example, you just said that last week was terrible and you should have lost weight.
Right.
All right, so why don't we turn this thing around into something more like, I feel as though I did everything I should have to lose weight last week. I also realized that my overall goal is weight loss. 1 week should not be taken too seriously. My actions, they were on point. Now, I have a sheet of paper here, list of words, absolute and extreme words not to use, to avoid. Words like awful, all, every, horrible, terrible, must have, need, and so on. The list, it's not comprehensive, but it will help you begin to recognize these types of words as you practice restructuring your negative thoughts and statements. So I think this is important for you to track your negative thoughts and statements. And every time you have one, you should, write down that negative thought, write down the time of day, write down the emotion you were feeling, and of course, what the original negative thought or statement was. Right? And of course, I want you to write down what the turnaround thought should be. So tomorrow, I don't want you to use any of these words. It's not going to be easy. It'll be tough. But at least it'll help you begin to recognize how often you use these negative words and negative statements. How about let's practice on this one? I want you to share with me a recent negative thought or statement you had about one of your set goals.
Well, I really hate it when my friends offer me fatty foods and, they put me in a horrible bind when they do that.
Yeah, I understand. Can you tell me what day you had this thought?
It was earlier today.
Wow.
Lunchtime.
Today. How about the emotion you were feeling at the time?
I was definitely annoyed.
Okay, well, that's good. This is a good example. Let's turn this around. How can you make this more of a less negative statement?
Well, I know my friends don't know about my nutrition program, so if I shared with them about it, they'd probably be more supportive. And I know they're not trying to cause harm, and they're actually trying to be nice to me. The nutrition program is a challenge, but it's not horrible.
It is. You know what? Great job. Good job, buddy.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, of course.
As you can see, constant negative thoughts can have a negative impact on a client's motivation. However, these negative thoughts can be turned around and eventually altogether avoided with practice. It's important to note that being able to both identify and turn around negative thoughts is a learned skill that can take a client a while to master. So practice and encouragement will be needed.
So this is definitely, I know, right? The second guy, it's always, the acting is always a little rough in these sketches, but that guy in particular is tough to watch. But these are actually, I'll tell you from experience, these are pretty real scenarios that you're going to run into. So yeah, we're often going to run into sort of these we call automatic problem thoughts. And so a lot of times your clients will have very strong hyperbolic reactions to it, right? Like they're going to exaggerate a lot as like using language that's very, very intense in response to these things. So one of the things we need to realize about like that is going to be one of the biggest causes of stress that we've got are these ideas of lapse and relapse. So lapse is the big thing that often freaks people out, but it's not actually as big a deal as it's sort of seen as it feels like at the time, right? So lapse is a temporary misstep from a plan. So in the video we just watched, right, like that guy was having consistent weight loss and then he ran into a week where his weight plateaued. So that's like an example of like, maybe it's because of lapsing, right? It's actually kind of hard to tell from the video, but if they were to like review like his food journal or workout log and we saw that like maybe it was just like really hard for him to get into the gym that week. And so it's like, yeah, I kind of fell off the wagon. You know, I've been exercising regularly and then I didn't this week. And sure enough, here's the effect that it had, right? So that would be a very good example of a lapse, right? So lapses are going to happen. There's, you know, it's just a natural part of the behavior change like process. But the important thing is to make sure that we accept that and do not let it turn into a relapse. And a relapse is a change back into old problematic behaviors, right? Like if your client has consistently been changing their habits and then all of a sudden like one day, you know, they decide to skip the gym because they just didn't feel like it. They were just exhausted. That's actually okay. That happens every now and then, you know? It's kind of like, I mean, you guys have heard me say this about like absences here at Sochi. It's okay to miss class once in a while. Like there's room for it. You have to have 80% attendance or higher. But what I always tell people is never miss 2 days in a row. Do whatever you have to do to avoid missing 2 days in a row. If you have to miss a day of class because of like an appointment or, you know, maybe you just need a personal day. I'm open to it. I really am. But do not miss 2 days in a row. That is where you start to turn it into a habit. That's where it becomes a problem. So that's lapsing versus relapsing, right? Now, how do you keep that from happening? Well, step one, accept that it happened. Don't try to play it off again, like we talked about, like our problem solving earlier. Like recognize that it's a problem, right? Lapses are problems. They just don't have to be permanent problems, right? So accept it and say, all right, this did happen. I goofed up, right? Hit the replay button. Walk yourself through what happened there, and then walk yourself through doing it with the correct action. We're going to talk about this in particular tomorrow when we talk about imagery and visualization. You know, those are two tools to like help you sort of walk your way through like a process, and that can build again like that stress inoculation, and maybe it keeps you from falling off the wagon again. Self-monitor in the future to get yourself back on track. Again, calendars work really well for this, and then move on and, you know, don't dwell on this problem weeks later, right? So another thing we saw in the video is he was helping him with his language, right? He was encouraging him to use more positive statements and avoid like negative language. That is what we call rational emotive therapy, which is actually really, honestly, guys, this is actually a type of therapy on its own. This is like a whole branch, not just something within the CBT world. But this is a form of therapy that helps people decrease irrational beliefs, right? And it basically comes through learning how to speak and use more positive language. It changes the way an individual expresses themselves in the hopes that it will create positive changes in their outlook. Basically, your words matter. There's another side of this. If you guys ever want to hear about it, if you ever want to do a little bit of your own research on this, there's what is called neuro-linguistic programming, or NLP. And what this is actually pseudoscientific approach. Yeah, it definitely has like some not so hard observable science to it. But basically looking at using like language specifically to reprogram like how you think or feel or behave. Basically, again, your words matter. And so like making sure that you are using like the proper language to describe things is important, rather than focusing on automatic problem words, which are like these problematic beliefs or these problematic words. I suck at this, I'm terrible, all these like really extreme, I'm awful every time, I'm horrible, terrible, I totally suck at this. I have to, I need to, I must, right? Like all these like very extreme, very absolute words that are associated with like problematic behaviors. This is definitely something I struggle with a little bit. I tend to use pretty extreme language sometimes. And so like helping your clients like use, recognize that like, hey, it's not a very accurate viewpoint that, you are just in general bad at this. It's like you had a bad week. You're not completely off the wagon, right? Those are two very different things. And we have to be able to recognize that and help our clients recognize that and maintain it, right? So this is where we come to what is called EAT as an acronym, right? EAT stands for emotion, automatic problem thoughts, and turnaround thoughts. So tracking the use of this and looking at EAT, you can help your client understand that like they have a negative emotion associated with an automatic problematic thoughts. And the solution is to turn that thought around into something more manageable and much more helpful, right? So we will want to work with our clients to generate alternative, more constructive, positive thoughts, right? So the irrational beliefs that you're generally going to hear your clients have are, we call them arbitrary interferences, which basically means that it's like, well, everyone in my life is making this harder on me. Or it's like bad things just always happen to me. I'm very unlucky, right? And it's like unluckiness, this belief of unluckiness, it comes from this idea that like you are not in control of like your own lifestyle. Like you legitimately believe like the world is out to get you. That's an arbitrary interference, like something that would happen to, maybe the same thing happens to two people, but one person recognizes like, wow, that's a bummer that happened, but moving on, right? Whereas someone else is like, this kind of thing always happens to me, right? That's an example of an automatic irrational belief. That's an arbitrary interference. Or overgeneralization. Or catastrophizing. These two kind of go hand in hand, but overgeneralization is where you're like, well, I'm just bad at stuff in general, right? And then catastrophizing is where, this is where somebody might believe they're like, oh, I'm going to be late. And if I'm late, everyone there is going to judge me and everybody's going to judge me. And I'm going to be a total social outcast. And then once I'm a total social outcast, I'll never get invited to this kind of thing again, which means I'm not going to succeed in my career, which means I'm going to be homeless, which means I'm going to end up on the streets. Like it's like, whoa, you got that all from being stuck in traffic. That's an example of catastrophizing. It's literally making mountains out of molehills, if you've ever heard that phrase, right? So a lot of these are all like what we call schemas, right? These are schemas, which are these pervasive, irrational beliefs that exist, right? And schemas where you just, again, catastrophized, you have general negative thinking. These are holding us back, right? These are things that very easily hold us back in our life. So it makes it very difficult for us to be able to cope with stressors when we feel like we don't have a lot of control. So helping our clients, restructure these schemas into something more positive, very big for us as personal trainers. Again, if you've got a client who just thinks they are generally bad at exercise and you help them recognize that that's irrational and there's certain aspects of things that they are very, very, very good at, right? And it's like, hey, how did you get good at that, right? And they got good at it. It's like, well, I practiced a lot. It's like, okay, so do you want to be good at this other thing? It's like, yeah. And it's like, okay, so then what's the path? It's like, I guess I need to practice a lot, right? Like that's a much more rational and much more like controllable and much more positive viewpoint on like in this world, right? So schema process, right? Maintenance, thoughts and behaviors. We want to maintain, previously developed schemas, right? So like basically you want to help your client recognize that we're trying to break down their maintenance of that schema. The thing about schemas, this is honestly similar to like stereotypes. And honestly, like you look at like people who have like certain prejudices and stuff, they have what's called confirmation bias. And confirmation bias is, let's say you're driving, right? And you have this belief that seniors are bad drivers, right? You just have this belief that like old people are worse drivers on the road and shouldn't be allowed to have a license. And you're driving and someone cuts you off, and then you look in the mirror to see who, you look to see like this person that cut you off, and you see that it's like a 20-something-year-old. If you have like a if you have confirmation bias, your brain is not going to recognize that 20-year-old. It's going to go meh, and it's going to just go in one ear and right out the other. But the next time you get cut off and you look and you see that it's like a senior person, you're like, of course it was, right? And it confirms your biases that are pre-existing. That is very similar to schemas, right? People will often maintain their schemas because they will have confirmation bias towards those schemas. They're like, I'm a very unlucky person. And then something happens that, yeah, sure enough is, a bummer, right? And they're like, see, this kind of thing always happens to me. Whereas the reality is like that kind of thing kind of happens to everybody. We are very bad at recognizing certain things. Here's a good example. Dalen, Andres, do you guys feel like you have a talent for picking the slow lane when you are driving?
Picking the slow lane?
Yeah. Do you feel like?
Hell no, I avoid that at all costs.
Well, no, what I mean is, do you feel like whenever you change lanes, the lane that you get into slows down?
Nah, I feel like I try to get all the way over to the lane next to the HOV.
Okay.
As much as possible, but I mean, I'm a person that's zipping in and out. Like I won't stay in a lane. If I see another lane start to move a little better, I just get on over. My truck's so big, I just beats my way in. And
fair enough. All right, that sounds pretty healthy. Andres, what about you?
Well, as a professional Lyft driver,
right?
I mean, I've been driving. I mean, I drive pretty normal, but yeah, usually, I mean, it's an everyday struggle, like getting into lanes and it being the slow lane. It happens.
Okay, well, that's also pretty healthy, right? See, me, one of the reasons why I tend to be like a very stressed driver is sometimes I have this negative schema where I'm like, of course, this lane slows down immediately the minute I get into it.
Yeah, yeah.
That's totally inaccurate. That's not true. Like that lane did not just slow down the minute I entered it, but that's an irrational thought. And like one of the things that I've like had to work through is like, hey, I got to recognize this is a totally irrational thing. That's totally untrue.
It sounds like you feel like the world revolves around you.
Exactly, right? Exactly. Yeah, that is an irrational schema. You nailed it on the head. Yeah. Or like when you're in the grocery store, I used to, man, there's so many times where I go, like, actually, this is, oh no, I got a really good one right now. This is a true schema. And honestly, here's what's weird. I actually genuinely believe this one still. So Trader Joe's is only letting in so many people. And what will happen is every freaking time I'm the cutoff person. It has happened. I've been measuring it lately because I started noticing. I was like, man, I am always the cutoff person. They're like, oh, actually, hold on. We're going to let you in the next group. And it happens every time. And it has happened. It did not happen last week, but it happened 4 weeks in a row. Then I had this written down somewhere. And then it didn't happen again. And then it happened like 3 other times. But it was like, I mean, right now, about 80% of the time when I go to the grocery store, I am the cutoff person that gets stopped and they'll let it in. And an irrational version of that thought might be like, God, I'm unlucky every freaking time. They always make me wait, right? But what I really think is happening is I tend to have, I don't know, I probably have a mild-mannered demeanor. And so I look like a patient person, I think. And so the person who is like regulating how many people are going in, they're not counting how many people go in. They're just, letting a few people in as it feels. And then they're like, oh, this guy's not going to mind waiting. And then they stop me consistently. So I have hard data to back up the fact that I get stopped more, but I don't think it comes from a place of me being unlucky. I think that it comes from another place. I think there's a very
I totally agree with you. I do think that way a lot about a lot of line cutting or
right?
maybe last one for something.
Yeah. And the thing about that is, right, is if you're a very irrational person, that would lead to stress. That would lead to you being kind of mad at the world all the time, right? But the answer is the fact that it's like, well, I mean, like, if you're unhappy with it, then you should look more like urgent. You should look, you could do things that are going to affect the other people around you, and that's going to, like, if you change that, you'll get different results. And again, this is coming back around to my favorite thing. I always talk about conscientiousness. It's huge, being aware. So wrapping everything up today, let's look at how we can apply this to our stages of change. So there's a lot of different techniques. We talked about, like, rational emotive therapy, learning how to, like, be a little more positive, stress management and stress inoculation, problem solving, and creating healthy obsessions, right? So which of these is going to be the techniques for, which clients are we trying to get them to adopt, like, healthy changes in their life? Well, if your client is in the pre-contemplative or contemplative stages, right, generally you're going to focus a little bit more on the cognition side of things, where you're really going to, like, try to help your client recognize that a problem exists. That's going to be the type of thing with a pre-contemplator. Now, if your client is a contemplator where they're thinking about exercise, right? Well, this is where we can start to maybe determine what their negative thoughts are and their negative schemas that are pervasive, and accurately defining the problem, rather than, like, saying, like, well, I want to get healthy, but I have a slow metabolism, right? Let's accurately define that problem instead. So it's like, well, you want to get healthy, but, like, currently I'm just not that physically active. I tend to be very sedentary, right? So that's clients who are the contemplative, getting them to recognize those problems accurately. If you've got a client in the preparation stage, right? This is a client who, like, now we can start thinking about, it's like, well, if healthy eating is a problem, why don't we start thinking about, like, what we like to eat and how we can come up with healthy versions of that. Or we can start making, like, specific decisions related to that problem solving that we determined, right, in the contemplative stage. We started working on problem solving. Once your client is in preparation, let's start making some decisions, like, all right, we threw a bunch of stuff at the wall. What are we actually going to try out? And then that moves us directly forward. That's going to, once we know what we're going to try out, boom, let's start taking some actions, right? So we start looking at EAT, how to break down those emotional schemas. And then we start verifying, right? We're verifying whether or not the decisions we made are actually going to work, right? It's like, well, we said we were going to exercise an hour a day. Did that work? Nope, it was too busy for my schedule. Great, let's go back to, let's stay in the action state. Let's just keep trying to be active regularly, but let's try a new decision. Why don't we, instead of trying to be active an hour a day, why don't we try to be active 3 days a week and then get a little bit of extra activity, like a long, maybe like an hour and a half, 2 hour hike on the weekends, right? Let's try a new solution, right? And then maintenance is where, like, now we've developed some healthy coping strategies. We've got some resilience, and again, we start going through this whole process again with maybe like a harder, more challenging goal. And that is cognitive behavioral therapy. Get to talk about we got all emotional today, quite literally. So you guys have any questions today? Any questions, comments, or concerns?
No, I love this class, or this, part of it.
It's fun, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Super unique. What about you, Dalen? Anything?
Yeah, that video I asked you to share the other day. I'm finding myself going back to that video because I have road rage when I'm driving and fussing, cursing, and things like that. So I'm trying to use that video to get me to go to a different place, maybe focus more on the song or something positive going on.
Yeah.
Then to get riled up.
This is water, right? I always think that This is Water video.
Sorry, Dalen, is that your name?
Yeah.
Bro, I understand, man. I'm driving at least 9 to 12 hours a day. And there's like a level of patience that I gotta have when driving Lyft, especially with like clients in the car. But I have like massive road rage, but I control it. It's kind of over the years I've learned, I guess, how to deal with it, but it's been pretty wild.
Yeah.
You're getting it full circle too, because you're driving, like, you got customers in the car and you dealing with the people on the actual road. Yeah. That's a lot.
Well, you know what? It's a lot of patience, I guess. So maybe I could just deal with that. I don't know.
Oh man. But my favorite message from that video, my favorite message from that is like where he's talking about how it's not impossible that, and then he lays out like a scenario, like it's not impossible that this person who's in front of you at the grocery aisle, who's taking forever, has a really challenging life, and the only way she can afford groceries is pulling out 1 million individual coupons, right? And so we want to have compassion for that person. Or this person that just cut you off, it's not impossible that they're on their way to the hospital to to be there with their dying grandmother. It's not likely, but it's not impossible. And that's what I love about like that video, is like I constantly, whenever I'm losing my mind and I'm losing my temper, I'm like, this is water. I try to remind myself that like it may not be likely, but it's also not impossible, which means like, I can maintain my freaking temper. But yeah, love that. All right, guys. Well, I'll let you out of here and see you guys tomorrow. We'll end the week on imagery, which will be kind of fun. We'll talk a little bit about visualization and how to use your imagination to kind of go through things and create things.
Okay, Brad. Have a good one.
All right. See you guys.